I want to close with a quotation from a French philosopher by the name of Étienne Gilson. I say this, I quote this citation very often to seminarians to help them appreciate the importance of economics in what they're doing. But I think it applies to something broader than just the dynamic between religious leaders and the world of business. I think there may be something useful that you can take. And Gilson said, if you want to look at a cathedral like the facade of Notre Dame, which represents a rising of the soul to God, and if you want to build such a beautiful edifice that represents man's aspiration for transcendence and eternity, if you want to do this, you must first understand geometry. Piety is never a substitute for technique, he said. Isn't that wonderful? Just the beauty of the building is not sufficient to know how to build it. In order to make use of nature for the glory of God in this case, you must understand technique. The technique of how to construct a building. Geometry, the mathematical dimensions that go into architecture. I think it's the same thing with you who are future leaders, to look at your life and not just to dream dreams in a kind of pietistic fashion. By all means, keep that piety, but add to it the concrete, hard work of understanding architecture. Understand how to put this thing together. Because unless we're able to do that, we can have all the pious sentiments in the world, but we will never accomplish anything concretely for ourselves and for other human beings, for our world, unless we understand the technique. In your case, it's the technique of life, the technique of leadership. And so I leave you with that thought, that piety is never a substitute for technique as you contemplate the various elements, characteristics, I would say virtues, that are required in authentic leadership. Thank you very much. I'm open to any questions.
Okay.
Yes.
First of all, thanks for coming. Very interesting. You talked a lot about introspective things, taking time out to think, to listen to others, to understand yourself. From my experience, I gotta imagine it's true that you change as a person as you grow older. How does that fit into the whole dynamic of being a leader and understanding yourself if you change as time goes?
Well, one of the Greek philosophers put the question, if you stand in the river and stay there 5 minutes, is it the same river 5 minutes ago as it is now? Because the river has gone by you. So there's this concept of what the river is as an abstraction and what it is concretely. Who you are in your nature remains. Even biologically, who we are is set in our genetic code from the moment of our existence. I think the variable is not our nature. Our nature doesn't change. The variable are the inputs and then that internalization of how we grow. Cardinal Newman wrote a very good book, very important book, called On the Development of Christian Dogma. And it's a history of how Christianity kind of teases out. I mean, the church, as it existed in the first century, immediately after the death and resurrection of Christ, to the church today, is externally very different. I mean, it went from a Jewish sect under persecution by Roman invaders, occupiers, to this, multi-billion population throughout the world, if you put all the Christian churches together. The question is, to what extent is it the same as what it was? And what are the authentic developments from that? And he has, I think, the number actually may be 7 or maybe 11 types of authentic development. And I can't rattle those off. I could have a few years ago. I can't rattle those off. But what he's looking for there is how you see something authentically come that is not either a parasite out of it or an aberration of it, but how it takes and fulfills. This is the difference between something that metastasizes and something that flourishes. And I think that's the same as a metaphor with our lives. That's why it's so important to know our nature, to have the proper formation, in particular the formation in the virtues, so that as we change, we will prune off the things that are either extraneous or aberrant, or even the things that are good but redundant, that need the pruning in order to enable it to come forward again. I think an understanding of the classical virtues helps us to kind of guide that. Newman in this book says, to grow is to change, and to grow much is to have changed much. So I think this is our life. This is the thing. The question is, where are we going? That sense of vocation, that sense of nature, permeated by a sense of integrity, really passionate about what it is we're doing. All of these are elements of that authentic flourishing that we seek as human beings.
Father, nowadays I hear as a virtue the concept of being non-judgmental. How would you comment on that as a virtue? You talked a bit about tolerance. How would you compare those two as one being a virtue or not?